Montana Territory, 1881. Hannah Moore stepped down from the freight wagon at Alder Creek with a child burning against her shoulder and boots so worn the soles had split clean through. Her son, Caleb, pressed his face into her shawl, coughing in shallow bursts that made the men near the livery turn their heads and look away. She had sold everything that mattered to reach this place. The way she stood, straight-backed despite the weight, told them she had nowhere left to run. She had not come begging. She had come because of a letter. The letter was brief, written in a hand that looked like it hurt to form each word. A man named Silas Rowe needed a wife to hold his land claim and keep a house he no longer cared to warm. In exchange, he offered a roof, work, and silence. No promises beyond that. Hannah had read it twice, folded it carefully, and written back the same day. Silas Rowe was known in Alder Creek, though few spoke his name with ease. He had come back from the war, changed. That was the polite way of saying it. He worked cattle when his body allowed, slept more nights in the barn than the house, and spoke only when absolutely necessary. His left hand shook when the cold settled in. Some blamed the weather, others knew better. Hannah married him the day after she arrived. There was no church ceremony, no family witness, just a tired clerk, a preacher who smelled of whiskey, and vows spoken in a room that echoed. Silas did not look at Caleb during the exchange. Hannah noticed. She did not take offense. She had not asked for affection or fatherhood. She had asked for survival. The cabin stood 2 miles beyond the creek, backed against pine and shale. Inside it was clean but cold. 1 table, 2 narrow beds, a stove that worked if you fed it right. The walls were bare. No photographs, no curtains, nothing that suggested anyone had tried to make it home. "You and the boy take the room," Silas said. His voice was low, careful. "I'll use the cot." Hannah nodded. She carried Caleb inside and laid him on the bed. His skin was hot to the touch, his breathing uneven. She worried the thin mountain air would take what the fever had started. Silas did not ask what was wrong with the child. He did not ask her anything at all. But he listened. That first night, Hannah woke to Caleb coughing in the dark. She soaked rags in cool water and pressed them to his chest, humming low to calm him. When morning came, she found the stove already lit and a pot of water warming on the iron grate. She had not heard Silas rise, had not heard him leave. The days that followed were silent and separate. Silas worked the land, Hannah tended the boy. They moved around each other like strangers sharing a barn in a storm, grateful for the shelter, careful not to touch. But small things began to shift. Silas stopped taking the long cattle drives that kept him gone for days. He came back earlier when clouds gathered. He patched the cabin walls where the wind cut through, sealed cracks near the floor, and stacked firewood higher than one man would need for himself. Hannah assumed he was preparing for winter. She did not yet know he was preparing for something else entirely. Caleb's fever did not break. Some days it eased, other days it returned with force. Hannah watched her son grow thinner, his breath more labored, and she watched Silas Rowe, silent, careful, always nearby, begin to pay attention in ways she could not yet name.
The weeks passed in a rhythm of necessity. Hannah rose before dawn to stoke the fire. Silas left for the pastures and returned by dusk. They ate separately, him at the table, her beside Caleb's bed. Words were few and functional. Pass the salt. Storm coming. Woods low. It was not cruelty, it was caution. Hannah had been married before. She knew the difference between a man who withheld affection and one who had forgotten how to offer it. Silas fell into the second category. He moved through the cabin like a guest in his own life, never settling, never claiming space as his. But he was not careless. She noticed it first in the small repairs. A loose hinge on the pantry door tightened overnight. The draft near Caleb's bed sealed with strips of cloth and tar. The water barrel filled each morning before she woke. He never mentioned these things, never waited for thanks. Hannah began to wonder what kind of war Silas had fought. Not the battles, everyone knew about those, but the kind that left a man's hands steady and his voice gone. Caleb's condition worsened as autumn deepened. The boy could no longer sit up for long. His chest rattled with every breath. Hannah boiled water for steam, wrapped him in every blanket they owned, and prayed to a God she was no longer certain listened. One evening she found Silas standing in the doorway of the small room, watching Caleb sleep. He did not step inside, did not speak, just stood there, still as stone, his jaw tight. "He'll be all right," Hannah said, though she did not believe it. Silas looked at her. His eyes were gray and distant. "You should rest." "I can't." He nodded once and walked away. But that night, the stove burned hotter than usual, and in the morning a chair had been moved beside Caleb's bed, one with a straight back, positioned so Hannah could sit without slouching through her vigil. She had not asked for it. It appeared anyway. The town saw little of them. Silas made his supply runs alone, speaking only to the store clerk and the stable hand. He paid in cash, never credit. He did not linger. People whispered about the woman he had brought in. City bred, they said, though Hannah had never seen a city in her life. They whispered about the boy, too, sickly, unlikely to last the winter. Silas heard the talk. He did not respond. Hannah learned his routine by watching. He rose before first light and checked the fence line. He mucked the stalls and fed the horses with mechanical precision. He split wood in the afternoons, his swings controlled and economical, favoring his right side. His left hand trembled when he gripped the axe too long. She learned other things, too. He did not drink. He did not raise his voice. When Caleb cried out in the night, Silas stopped whatever he was doing and listened until the sound passed. He never entered the room, but he was always listening. One cold afternoon, while Silas was out checking traps, Hannah scrubbed the floors and reorganized the pantry. The shelves were nearly bare. Cornmeal, salt pork, a few tins. She shifted a sack of flour and felt the board behind it shift. Curious, she pressed against it. The wood gave slightly. She pulled the board free. Behind it was a narrow recess carved deliberately into the wall. Inside sat a row of glass bottles, each wrapped carefully in cloth. She unwrapped one. The label was written in the same stiff hand as the letter she had answered. Willow bark extract. She unwrapped another. Feverfew, dried horehound root, a sealed tin of powdered bark. Medicine, not fresh, not recently gathered. Stored, maintained, replaced over time. Hannah stared at the bottles, her pulse loud in her ears. Silas Rowe had been preparing for a sick child long before she arrived. Hannah replaced the board carefully and said nothing. She returned to Caleb's bedside, her mind turning over what she had found. The bottles were not random. They were specific, chosen, the kind of medicines a person gathered only after learning what worked and what did not. The kind someone kept when they could not afford to be caught unprepared. Silas had known. Somehow he had known a child would come, or he knew one might not survive without help. That evening, Silas returned with a brace of rabbits and a sack of potatoes from a neighboring homestead. He cleaned the game outside, skinned and quartered it with practiced efficiency, and left the meat on the counter without comment. Hannah prepared supper: beans, cornbread, rabbit stew simmering low. She set the table as usual, one plate for him, one bowl for herself near Caleb's door. But this time she stayed at the table. Silas paused in the doorway, snow still dusting his shoulders. He looked at her, then at the second plate she had set across from her own. "Sit," she said quietly. He hesitated, then did. They ate in silence for a time. The stove ticked. The wind scraped against the shutters. Caleb's breathing was audible from the other room, rough but steady. Hannah set down her spoon. "Those bottles behind the pantry, they yours?" Silas did not look up. "Yes." "You knew what he'd need." "I knew what children need when their lungs weaken." His voice was flat, but not defensive. "I learned once." She waited, but he offered nothing more. "How long have you kept them?" she asked. 3 years, maybe 4. "Before you wrote the letter?" "Before I wrote the letter." Hannah studied his face. It was weathered, lined deeper than his years suggested. His jaw was set in the way of men who had trained themselves not to flinch. "You weren't looking for a wife. You were looking for someone who needed what you had." Silas met her eyes then. "I was looking for someone who wouldn't ask questions I couldn't answer." She nodded slowly. "I won't." But she understood now. The marriage had not been random. Silas had placed that advertisement knowing exactly what kind of woman would respond. A desperate one, a mother, someone who would bring a child into a house that had been prepared for one. He had been waiting. The question was, waiting for what? Redemption? A second chance? Or simply the opportunity to not fail again? Hannah did not ask. She had promised she wouldn't. The days grew shorter. The first snow came early, heavy and mean. Silas reinforced the barn and moved the livestock closer. He checked the roof for weak points and cleared the chimney. He brought in enough firewood to last until spring. Caleb's fever spiked and fell in cycles. On good days, he sat up and ate broth. On bad days, he could barely breathe. Hannah used the medicine sparingly, uncertain how long they would last. She mixed willow bark tea when the fever climbed. She boiled horehound for the cough. Silas watched but did not interfere. He had given her the tools. He trusted her to use them. But when Caleb worsened in the night, Silas always woke. Hannah would hear him moving in the outer room, stoking the fire, heating water. He never came inside, but he made sure everything she needed was ready. One night, exhausted, Hannah fell asleep in the chair beside Caleb's bed. She woke hours later to find a blanket draped over her shoulders and the fire built high. Silas was gone, back to his cot in the corner of the main room. She pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes. For the first time since arriving, she felt something close to safety. Not because Silas Rowe had promised her anything, but because he had quietly, without ceremony, begun keeping promises she had never asked him to make. Winter settled over the cabin like a held breath. The world outside turned white and silent. The creek froze solid. The wind came down from the mountains sharp enough to cut. Inside, routines deepened into something almost comfortable. Silas rose before dawn and cleared paths through the snow. He fed the animals, checked the traps, and returned by mid-morning with whatever game the land offered. Hannah cooked, mended, and watched over Caleb with a vigilance that never eased. They spoke more now, though still in fragments. "Weather's turning. Fence needs mending. Boys breathing easier today." It was not conversation. It was communication. Caleb began to improve in small, uncertain measures. His fever broke for longer stretches. His appetite returned. He could sit propped against pillows without his chest tightening. Hannah allowed herself to hope, though she guarded it carefully. Silas noticed. She saw it in the way his shoulders loosened slightly when he passed the boy's room, in the way he stopped bracing himself each time he came through the door, as if expecting news he could not bear to hear. One afternoon, Caleb was strong enough to sit at the table. Hannah made him weak tea and dry toast. He ate slowly, his hands thin but steady. Silas came in from splitting wood. He paused when he saw the boy upright, awake. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. "Cold out there?" Caleb asked. His voice was hoarse from disuse. Silas set down the axe. "Cold enough. Can says you work even when it snows." "Work doesn't wait for weather." Caleb nodded seriously, as if this were wisdom worth remembering. Silas glanced at Hannah. She saw a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. He pulled out a chair and sat. It was the first time the three of them had shared the table together. They did not speak much, but the silence felt different now, less like distance, more like rest. The days passed. Caleb grew stronger. He began to walk short distances, across the room, then to the door, then outside to stand on the porch and breathe the cold air. Hannah stayed close, but Silas was always closer, watching, not hovering, but present. One morning, Caleb followed Silas to the woodpile. Hannah watched from the window as her son stood beside the tall, silent man and observed him work. Silas did not send him away. He split logs with careful, economical swings, adjusting his stance to favor his stronger side. Caleb asked questions Hannah could not hear. Silas answered briefly, gestured occasionally, and continued working. When they came back inside, Caleb's cheeks were flushed with cold and exertion. He looked more alive than he had in months. "Silas says I can help stack wood when I'm stronger," he announced. Hannah looked at Silas. He shrugged slightly, almost apologetic. "If that's all right," he added. "It's all right," she said. That night, she found Silas replacing one of the bottles on the hidden shelf. She had discovered he did this periodically, checking seals, rotating stock, ensuring nothing spoiled. He moved with the precision of someone who had learned that preparation was the only defense against chaos. "You planned for this," Hannah said from the doorway. "Before we came, before you knew us." Silas straightened. He did not turn around. "I lost a boy once, long time ago. I swore I wouldn't be unprepared again." The words landed heavy in the quiet room. Hannah stepped closer. "Your son?" "Not mine by blood, but mine all the same." "What happened to him?" Silas closed the panel carefully. "Fever took him. I didn't know what to do, didn't have what he needed. By the time I learned, he was too late." He turned then, his face unreadable in the lamplight. "I won't let that happen again." Hannah reached out and touched his arm. He did not pull away. "You won't," she said. "You didn't." Silas looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. Something in him seemed to ease just slightly. "He's getting better," Silas said quietly. "Because of you. Because you got him here in time. Because you were ready." They stood there, the space between them smaller than it had ever been. The first hard frost came in late November. It turned the ground to iron and painted ice across the window panes in patterns like broken glass. Anna woke to the cold and immediately checked Caleb. He was sleeping, his breathing even. She allowed herself a moment of relief. That relief lasted until midnight. Caleb woke gasping. His chest heaved, but no air seemed to reach his lungs. His lips went pale, then faintly blue. Hannah pulled him upright, trying to ease the pressure, but his eyes went wide with panic. "Silas!" Her voice cracked through the cabin. He was beside her in seconds, barefoot and alert. He took one look at Caleb and moved without hesitation. He lit the lamp with steady hands, pulled down the medicine tin, measured powder with the precision of someone who had done this before. He mixed it with warm water from the reservoir and held the cup while Hannah supported Caleb's head. "Slow," Silas murmured. "Just sips." Caleb tried, but his throat convulsed. He coughed, struggled, his small body rigid with effort. Hannah's hands shook. "He needs a doctor. We have to take him to town." "No," Silas's voice was firm. "He won't survive the ride, not like this." "Then what do we do?" Silas set down the cup. He knelt beside the bed and carefully lifted Caleb upright against his chest, supporting the boy's weight with both arms. He positioned him so his back was straight, his lungs open. "Listen to me," Silas said, his voice low and steady near Caleb's ear. "You're going to breathe with me. In, hold, out, just like that. Don't fight it. Let it come slow." Caleb whimpered, his small hands clutching at Silas's shirt. "In," Silas repeated. He demonstrated, his own breathing slow and deliberate. "Hold, out." Hannah watched, frozen.
She had never seen Silas hold anyone, never seen him reach for another person without hesitation, but now he held her son as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Again, Silas said, "In, you're doing it. Hold, out." Minutes passed. Caleb's breathing stayed ragged, but the panic began to ease. His grip on Silas's shirt loosened slightly. Silas kept murmuring, not comfort, not reassurance, instructions, breath by breath, a rhythm to follow when the body forgot how. Hannah tried the medicine again. This time Caleb managed small sips. His color improved marginally. The worst of the spasm passed, but Silas did not let go. He stayed exactly where he was, holding the boy upright, maintaining the position that kept the airways clear. When Caleb's head drooped with exhaustion, Silas adjusted carefully, keeping him steady. "You can put him down now," Hannah whispered. "Not yet. Needs to stay upright a while longer." So Silas sat on the floor, his back against the bed frame, Caleb resting against his chest. Hannah sank into the chair, her legs weak with relief and terror. The lamp burned low, the wind rattled the shutters, and Silas rose, sat motionless, holding a child who was not his until the sky began to pale with dawn. When morning came, a neighbor rode up, old Mr. Garrett from the next property over. He had seen the lamp burning all night and come to check. He dismounted and approached the door. Hannah stepped out to meet him, exhausted. "Everything all right, Mrs. Rowe?" Garrett asked, peering past her into the cabin. Through the doorway, Silas was visible, still on the floor, still holding Caleb, who had finally fallen into real sleep. "That boy yours?" Garrett asked, squinting. Silas looked up. His face was haggard, but his eyes were clear. "He is," Silas said. The words came without hesitation, without qualification. Garrett nodded slowly, satisfied. "Good to know. Saw the light and worried. Glad it's nothing serious." He tipped his hat and rode off. Hannah stepped back inside and closed the door. Silas met her gaze across the small room. Something had changed. Something had been decided in the dark hours of the night and spoken aloud in the morning light. The boy was his. The claim had been made, in front of a witness, publicly, irrevocably. Hannah's throat tightened. She nodded once. Silas carefully, finally, laid Caleb back down on the bed and stood. His legs were stiff from hours on the floor. He stretched slowly, wincing. "I'll make coffee," Hannah said quietly. "I'll bring in more wood." They moved around each other, the morning routine resuming, but everything had shifted.
After that night, the shape of their lives changed in ways both small and absolute. Silas no longer slept on the cot in the corner. He moved it into the main room near the stove and positioned it where he could hear if Caleb's breathing changed. He woke at the smallest sound, a cough, a shift in the bed, the rustle of blankets. Hannah would find him standing in the doorway some mornings, just listening, making sure. He did not explain this, he simply did it. Caleb recovered slowly. The crisis had weakened him, left him tired and fragile, but the worst had passed. His lungs began to clear. His appetite returned in earnest. He started asking questions again about the ranch, the animals, the mountains beyond the creek. Silas answered them all, not with many words, but with patience. "Why do the horses stay in the barn when it's cold?" "Keeps them healthy. Cold like that gets into their lungs, same as yours." "Do they get medicine too?" "Sometimes, different kind." "Can I see them?" Silas glanced at Hannah. She nodded. "When you're stronger," Silas said. "Another week, maybe." Caleb accepted this without complaint. He trusted Silas in the way children trust adults who tell them the truth, even when the truth is not what they want to hear. The town noticed the change. When Silas made his supply runs now, he brought Caleb with him, wrapped in blankets, riding in the wagon bed on a pile of straw. The boy was too weak to walk far, but strong enough to sit upright and watch the world pass. People saw them together, Silas guiding the wagon, Caleb beside him, small and watchful, Silas's hand resting on the boy's shoulder when the trail got rough. Word spread the way it does in small places. The ranch hand had taken in the woman and her boy, not just sheltered them, claimed them. That made a difference. It meant something. The clerk at the general store started adding extra to Silas's orders, a peppermint stick for the boy, a small sack of sugar for the woman, gifts disguised as mistakes in tallying. Silas paid for them anyway, but he did not refuse them. Back at the cabin, things continued to shift. Silas began eating at the table regularly. He repaired the chairs so they did not wobble. He built a narrow bench near the stove and positioned it so Caleb could sit close to the warmth without being underfoot. One afternoon, Hannah found him planing a piece of wood smooth. "What's that for?" she asked. "Toy," Silas said. "Horse. Figured the boy might want one." He worked on it for days, carving in the evenings after the day's labor was done. His hands were clumsy with detail. The left one trembled when he worked too long, but he persisted. The horse took shape: 4 legs, a mane, a tail, rough but recognizable. He sanded it until there were no splinters and rubbed it with oil until it gleamed. When he gave it to Caleb, the boy held it like treasure. "Thank you," Caleb whispered. Silas nodded. "Welcome." Hannah watched from across the room. She saw the way Silas's shoulders relaxed when Caleb smiled, saw the way he looked at the boy, not with the distant observation of a stranger, but with the quiet vigilance of someone who had decided this child mattered. She understood then. Silas was not trying to replace the boy he had lost. He was trying to save the one he had been given. That night, after Caleb fell asleep clutching the wooden horse, Hannah found Silas outside checking the animals one last time before bed. The air was cold and sharp. Stars crowded the sky like scattered salt. "He loves it, the horse." "Good. You didn't have to do that." Silas closed the barn door and latched it. "I wanted to." They stood in the darkness, breath clouding white between them. "Silas," Hannah said, carefully, "what you said to Mr. Garrett, that Caleb was yours. I meant it. I know you did, but you didn't have to." "I did," interrupted Silas quietly. "I did have to." He looked at her then, his face shadowed but his eyes clear. "I'm not good at this, at family, at being what people need, but I'm trying." Hannah stepped closer. "You're better at it than you think." Silas did not respond, but he did not look away either. The space between them felt smaller than it ever had, not yet closed, but no longer unbridgeable.
Winter deepened, but the cabin felt warmer now, not just from the stove, though Silas kept it fed and burning steady. The warmth came from something harder to name, from shared meals and small conversations, from routines that no longer felt like obligations. Caleb grew stronger each day. By mid-December, he could walk the length of the cabin without tiring. By January, he was following Silas outside for short stretches, bundled in layers, his breath fogging in the cold air. Silas taught him small tasks: how to scatter feed for the chickens, how to check the water trough for ice, how to stack kindling so it dried properly. He never rushed the boy, never expected more than Caleb could give. Hannah watched them from the window, watched Silas crouch down to show Caleb how to hold the feed bucket, watched him steady the boy when he stumbled in the snow, watched the careful distance Silas maintained, close enough to help, far enough to let Caleb try on his own. He was teaching the boy how to be capable, how to be steady, the way someone had once taught him, perhaps, or the way he wished someone had. One evening, Silas came in from the barn later than usual. His face was drawn, his left hand shaking more than normal. He had pushed himself too hard. Hannah saw it immediately. "Sit," she said, pulling out a chair. "I'm fine." "You're not. Sit." He obeyed, too tired to argue.
Hannah heated water and made willow bark tea, the same remedy she had used for Caleb's fever. She pressed the cup into Silas's hands and guided them steady when they trembled. "Drink." He did. She stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He did not pull away. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said quietly. "I'm used to it. That doesn't mean it's right." Silas looked up at her. His eyes were tired, but something in them had softened over the months. Something that used to be locked tight had begun slowly to open. "I don't know how to do it differently," he admitted. "Then learn," Hannah said. "We have time." It was the first time either of them had spoken of the future as something certain, as something they would share. Silas's hand found hers where it rested on his shoulder. He held it briefly, carefully, then let go. But the touch remained. The seasons began to shift. The days lengthened by minutes. The snow started to thin. Caleb grew restless with health, eager to run and explore. Silas built a small pen near the house where the boy could play safely within sight. One afternoon, Hannah was mending by the window when she heard laughter. She looked up, startled. Caleb was in the yard, chasing a stick Silas had thrown. The boy's legs were still thin, but his stride was strong. His face was bright with joy. And Silas, silent, careful Silas, was smiling. It was small, barely there, but unmistakable. Hannah's throat tightened. She set down her mending and stepped outside. Caleb ran to her, breathless. "Mama, did you see? I ran all the way to the fence." "I saw, sweetheart. Silas says when spring comes, I can help with the planting." "Does he now?" Silas approached, hands in his pockets, expression guarded again, but not closed. "If that's all right." "It's all right," Hannah said. She looked at him steadily. "More than all right." That evening, after Caleb fell asleep, Hannah and Silas sat at the table together, not eating, just sitting. The lamp burned low between them. "I didn't think this would work when I answered your letter." "Neither did I." "But it has." Silas nodded slowly. "It has." "Why do you think that is?" He considered the question. "Because neither of us expected more than we could give, so when we gave more, it mattered." Hannah reached across the table. Silas met her halfway. Their hands joined, warm and calloused and certain. "I'm glad I came here." "So am I." They sat in the quiet, holding on, not because they were afraid to let go, but because they no longer wanted to. Outside, the wind had died down, the stars were sharp and bright, and inside, the small cabin backed by pine and shale, 3 people who had each been alone had become something they had not planned for. A family.
Spring came to Montana territory the way it always did, slowly, stubbornly, dragging green up through the frozen ground. The creek thawed and ran high with snowmelt. The air warmed enough that Caleb could play outside without layers of wool. The land remembered how to live, and so did the people on it. Silas plowed the field behind the cabin, turning dark soil in long, straight rows. Caleb followed behind, dropping seed potatoes into the furrows the way Silas had shown him. The boy's hands were careful, his face serious with concentration. Hannah planted a kitchen garden near the house, carrots, beans, herbs for cooking and medicine both. She worked the earth with her hands, feeling the cold leave her fingers as the sun climbed higher each day. They moved around each other with an ease that had taken months to build. Silas no longer slept apart. The cot had been moved to the barn for visiting hands come summer. He shared the main room now, close enough to hear if anyone needed him, but no longer exiled to the margins of his own home. Some nights, after Caleb slept, Silas and Hannah sat on the porch and watched the sky deepen. They did not always talk. Sometimes silence was enough. But when they did speak, the words came easier now. "I was thinking," Hannah said one evening, "next winter we should get more chickens, maybe a milk cow."
We'd need to expand the barn. You could do that. We could do that, Silas corrected. I'll need help. Hannah smiled. Then we'll do it together. Silas looked at her, really looked, the way he had not allowed himself to in the beginning. He saw a woman who had arrived desperate and half-broken and had rebuilt herself into something strong, who had trusted him when he had given her little reason to. "I'm not easy to live with," he said quietly. "Neither am I. I have bad days, days when my hand won't stop shaking, when I can't get warm no matter how high the fire burns." "I know. And you're staying anyway?" It was not quite a question, but almost. Hannah reached over and took his hand, the left one, the one that trembled. She held it steady between both of hers. "I'm staying," she said, "not because I have nowhere else to go, because I don't want to be anywhere else." Silas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in his face had changed. The last of the armor he wore had finally come loose. "I love you," he said. The words were rough, unpracticed, but true. "I know," Hannah said. "I've known for a while." "And you?" She leaned closer. "I love you too. Both of us do." Inside, Caleb slept soundly, his wooden horse tucked under one arm. His breathing was clear and even. The medicines stayed on their hidden shelf, checked and maintained, but needed less and less. The boy thrived. He ran and laughed and asked endless questions. He followed Silas everywhere, learning the rhythms of ranch work, the patience required to tend living things. He called Silas by name now, easy and familiar, the way children do when they feel safe. And Silas, who had believed himself too broken to belong to anyone, answered every time. He showed up. He stayed. He proved day after quiet day that love was not about grand gestures or easy words. It was about preparation, about showing up when someone needed you, about holding steady when the world turned cold and uncertain. The people in town no longer whispered about the strange ranch hand and the woman he had married. They saw a family, a man, a woman, and a boy working land together, building something that would last. Silas Rowe had spent years waiting for a chance to save a child he could not save the first time. But what he had found was not redemption, it was belonging. And every morning when he woke to the sounds of Hannah moving in the kitchen and Caleb's voice calling his name from the yard, Silas understood what he had been given. Not a second chance, a first one, the kind that mattered most. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold tales from the Wild West. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.